sun being bona fide by Jupiter and connected also to Neptune. The most significant thing about this chart is Neptune is Jupiter is with Neptune trying the ascendant square the sun in Sagittarius. Do you all see the significance of that?
Of Jupiter being with
Jupiter
Uranus
in
square.
Neptune in the ninth.
Jupiter and Neptune in the ninth.
Delusional consciousness?
Oceanic consciousness, universal consciousness,
Oh.
God speaking through the internet,
Did you just call yourself God?
where you find all the people speaking for God now. I just was listening to a new one today. Monica sent away for a book, and it came here, and she told me I could open it, and I opened it, and it's the new hot Taoist internal alchemy guru who has a big website and a very popular book and a lineage going back to Ludong Ben. The Taoist alchemy of Wang Li Ping, as written about by this guy Nathan Bryan, and you can see both of them on the YouTube. And Nathan Bryan has a whole teaching internal alchemy class on the YouTube. So Jupiter and Neptune are in Jupiter's sign of Pisces, which has to do with being in the liminal space between the end of the year and the beginning of the new year, waiting for God. With Neptune, I think there has been an emergence of, it's kind of like springing forth into consciousness because of public need. People, I think, really more and more need some sort of something to believe in at this particular point. And I think that Jupiter-Neptune has had a real effect on that, because there are a lot more things that people are believing in this very idealistic way, and authorities emerging to preach particular systems and transmit. This particular chart is significant because at this moment that force is in the ninth house and trying the ascendant, so it's very much connected with what this group tonight is. Ninth house is my favorite house because it has to do with what one does away from work, away from what you do in the world, the 10th house, which is like your career, your profession, who you wish to be in the world. What comes after that, where you realize that becoming someone important in the world is dust in your mouth, and you want to find something deeper, something that instead of wanting to make a name or make money from, you're willing to give money to, give effort to, give service to even. The ninth is a Caden house, and I think that was kind of one of the basic points I wanted to make, is the three kinds of houses. Mm-hmm. The angular houses, the first, the seventh, which is oneself and others one encounters, and these are active houses. These are houses in which things happen. And 10th and 4th, 10th, what you want to become, what you want to be, what your profession, how you envision yourself being in the world, and the 4th is home, where you go when you go home. So those are the active houses where things are apparent.
The kentrons.
The kentrons, yeah, the pivot points. Then you have the Caden houses, which are what happens after you come off stage. where you go when you try to find God, or when a stranger comes into your life, that changes the whole way you see everything. You go on a pilgrimage, you go on some quest outside your ordinary world to find something that has meaning. Or it's the church you go to. And everybody has a religion, everybody has a church they go to. Now, some are very, very solitary. Mine is secret. And I think many people have a secret religion and a secret church. You know, because it's secret, one hesitates to talk much about it. You break the rules. And one of the reasons for me it's secret is that I have Mars in Gemini conjunct Uranus in the ninth house, which means I am a natural contrarian and heretic, and will eventually turn against any church that I join. So that I have to be very, very careful about how I manage what my relationship is with religions. I love cult videos, as you all know, about guys who obviously make people feel wonderful. And then some scandal erupts, and they're generally cast down, at least in terms of whoever makes a documentary about them. I've spent a good part of my life studying this phenomenon of why myself, particularly when I was younger, was so drawn to people that I hoped were superior to me and had some kind of development of consciousness, some kind of expansion of being that was above mine and that I could learn from and be helped by. Now, a guy like Opie, in writing about his own spiritual journey, looks at a guy like me and thinks that I, just went on a very weird guru trip with the whole Rajneesh thing. Krista asked me a question downstairs, just right after movement. She asked me if I was in love with Wong. And that relates to this whole subject, and the fact is that with people that you hope you can receive a transmission of higher being, bigger consciousness from, something happens that is very much analogous to falling in love. And I did that repeatedly with people that I hoped were significantly superior to me. And it has the same kind of illusory quality that romantic love does, at least in my case. And that just might be because of my Venus and Sun or whatever, but I can see in retrospect that every time I fell in love with a teacher or fell in love with a woman, there was an element of delusion in it, and there was an element of divine guidance. and putting me in a position where did get transmitted that eventually made a significant change in my life and did really help me. At the same time, from a distance, there definitely was a very delusional element to it all.
Delusional in the sense of expectations, or delusional in the sense of what you could get out of it, or who they were as people?
I think who they were as people. I think that's
somehow being more free from
being more free
condition.
from ordinary conditioning and emotional kinks than I was. And just from delusion itself. Like let's say with Rajneesh. Now, I only had one direct contact with Rajneesh, and it had been building up for like 2 years, where I was trying to make a heart bridge to this person that I, from a distance, was definitely in love with. Now, differently than most of the people who were around him, who were, that was their whole self-expression, was how much they were in love with Bhagwan, and it nauseated me. And that wasn't what I felt, but I did definitely feel something that was like being in love. And I even, there were times when I even burst into tears because of how much I felt for Bhagwan, and it was always a question, you know, exactly how he was in terms of consciousness. And it turns out that in certain ways he wasn't as conscious as I was. Because I knew more about what was going on in his commune than he did. And he should have known. You didn't have to be that enlightened to actually see what had started to happen inside that group of people. And that, you know, that makes it clear to me that was disillusioning in a particular kind of way. Although I see what came through him from whatever source that affected my life as coming from real guidance of divine sources. And this is my religious belief, my superstitious belief, is that those forces, those powers, those immortals that are guiding my destiny without telling me who they are, oftentimes will push me in a certain direction and then direct, you know, take over and say something through that person that is what I need to hear and understand. What Rajneesh said to me is like stayed with me, you know, permanently, and I gained from it.
No, what did he say?
What it was the sannyas ceremony. It was the only contact I had.
That picture.
That
Yeah.
picture that he focused on me for, you know, it's like this big deal. It's like a darshan, and you know, people who have been faithful sannyasins for years maybe get to come to darshan, you know, every couple of months or something. It's a small gathering in his courtyard, and if you come there for sannyas, you have to like wait 2 months on a waiting list before the night where they bring you in, and it's a big ceremony, and you wait outside.
It's like your spiritual wedding night.
It's like exactly like your spiritual night. That's even
Yeah. Classic cult terminology.
Classic cult terminology, and you're ushered into this, you know, beautiful room that's all marble, and you sit on the floor in a row, and there's like 12 of you on a given night, and you sit on a row, and you meditate, and he takes out a sheet of paper, and he looks at each person. He writes something on the sheet of paper. He puts the mala around your head, touches your third eye, and then he tells you what it writes down is your name, and then he explains your name to you. And my name was Swami Dhyan Acharya. Now the first name Dhyan, that's like the family name. It's like the kind of person you are. And most sannyasins were prem. Prem means love. A lot were anons. Anon means bliss. And it was kind of like the sort of spiritual type you were, what turns you on. Dhyan, of course, comes from Bodhidharma and Mahakashyap. It is the meditation, basically the turning your focus inward and sitting in silence. And Dhyan people, meditation people, are really kind of it was an observable kind of family, people who had that name. And, you know, all of his...
Like more introverted? Or
Generally they were more introverted, yeah. And people who were really into sitting meditation, too, oftentimes, and just the whole concept.
Did he know that about you, or just...
No.
Just grokked it?
Just grokked it. And the next part even more so, which I actually still am quite impressed by. So that was the family name, and the given name was Acharya, and Acharya in Pali or Sanskrit or whatever means character, and he went on this riff about how in the ordinary world people think of character as someone who has stalwart qualities and matches a particular picture of you know, what a good person is supposed to be. But the real meaning, the original meaning, and the meaning for someone who is a meditator is what happens when you go to the deepest part of yourself, where there's nothing but emptiness, and then what comes out of you. That was really cool. I thought. And the fact that I have always been a little bit fascinated with the concept of character just as a word in English. You know, that was the first astrology class I had was, you know, planets are destiny and destiny is character, something like that. And that it was also something that one could create as a protection, like an actor creating a character, and you maybe over time, for particular purposes, in particular circumstances, something develops that is both a spontaneous manifestation of how you are and kind of a unique character. You know, which, like Rajneesh himself very much was. You know, he talked about the fact that he didn't exist. You know, that his ego had vanished and there was nobody there. And at the same time, he was a very unique and obviously interesting and peculiar character. Not like any of the other gurus around. It's something that I continue to derive benefit from, I think.
Of course, because you're a Dion family, Achara.
Also, I think I may have some sort of a professorial aura about me. Now that I'm old
You
and
mean
cultivated.
of being a professor?
Of being a professor, or being somebody who's literate. You know, even though at that time I didn't even have a bachelor's degree, because the common Indian term for a professor is acharya.
Mm.
It's like a level of teacher in the guru spectrum. An acharya is like a professorial type who can teach the theory of stuff. And it was Bhagwan's title that he took before he took Bhagwan. He was Acharya Rajneesh for a long time. So when people saw the name Achara, oftentimes they would say, oh, it's a wordplay, he's calling you professor.
Meditation professor.
Meditation professor. Or
Smart
make
guy.
it funny, you know, that you pretend to be much more wise than you are, like professors do. So when it came to Wong, it was really quite different, and I did not have the same kind of falling in love with him as I did with Mrs. Stavely, who I was always most in love with, and then Rajneesh less so. I was much more skeptical, having been disillusioned. And Wong presented himself as an ordinary person. And you know, smoke and mirrors make a lot of difference. You know, when you have to like call somebody that you don't know up and ask them for an interview and have an appointment and come and meet with them, and is very formal, and you have to come with a question. You know, that has an effect on what you project onto the person. This whole falling in love thing, which is a projection of some sort of higher ideal that's a reflection of what hopefully eventually you will actually find, and that is the true master in the heart, the true guidance of authority that's in your real heart. And a projection is always something that, you know, what may actually be guiding you, they may work through that, but it's always to push you into being in love with yourself. It's having a sense of who you really are and what it's all for. But in the meantime, one needs some source of energy to help you practice. And there are methods can re-hook up people with those forces that can help, can guide. Wong, the actual methods that I learned from him were much more noticeably experienceable that I had like a really big response to doing the practice that he taught. And that over time, even though when I first met him I was not all that impressed, because he kind of met us at the airport and he was just a guy. He wasn't up on a throne or it wasn't like a special deal, to him. He did not take on the trappings of a Sherfu or a guru, and that makes, that may have an effect, who knows? Or I may have just been a little disillusioned with the fact that one does fall in love with and project this ideal upon someone through whom you may actually derive benefit.
Do you tend to fall in love with people who are more idealistic?
I tend to fall in love with people who are of my lineage, which is that of the heretics, to fall outside the prescribed orthodox boundaries of the methods that they often derive the most benefit from. It's an odd kind of school, but I do feel it as a lineage, as a school of people who do have this tendency kind of to argue about everything inside themselves and become disillusioned with everything that they experience in life. It can lead to a great many hard times and difficult feelings. But I think it's a legitimate school. It's not just certain people who are fucked up and fall by the wayside and are lost. I think there are protective powers for people like me.
So in terms of women, do you also fall in love with the heretics and the women, or is it completely separate from?
No, I don't think they're natural heretics. I would fall in love with women who were much more beautiful than I am. And there is a scale of beauty that everybody is on, one way or another. Nobody likes to admit it, but who's prettier than you are, for the most part. It's like in a kung fu match, you really kind of know who's got the edge. And I always went for women who were much higher on the scale than I was, and a little bit out of my league in that way, but who were locked in emotionally, who something had happened when they were children to lock their pericardium so that they had a hard time relating to people and forming relationships, and I was very good at breaking through that, establishing a connection with them. Those were generally the women that I had long-term relationships with. And they were always mystic types. They always wanted someone who was a channel for God, and looked for that to a degree in men. And in me were significantly disappointed. Ultimately.
You're not a channel for God?
Well,
Not in that way.
I thought I was. What I find kind of peculiar about my relationship with Wong is why, when I talk about him much, or in I'm around him, why do I start bawling? I find that very, very peculiar. So I still must be in love in that same peculiar kind of way that's a little bit delusional. I don't know. I don't understand it quite. I feel foolish about it. He is, and Li Jie as well, are a source of force that is very helpful for me doing a practice every day. And that's why I think that projection and delusion and falling in love with a guru is, for the most part, beneficial if it leads to somebody having a practice. It's very, very hard. I tried meditating for 3 years, by myself. And the first time that I ever sat with a group, it was so overwhelming that I thought, this is really, and it's still, to me, is like a verification that there's something going on with consciousness that's more than seems reasonable. The fact that working with a group of people is so much more powerful than working by yourself. So finding a way for a group of people to work together is, to me, been one of the critical questions of life, because the fact is it generally doesn't happen unless there's some central person that people are projecting higher being onto in a delusional kind of way. So one of the questions is, can you figure out a way for a group of people to be able to work together without that happening?
You think it can only be experienced if people are projecting that there is no real objective measure of being? It's all projection?
No, I don't think it's all projection. I think it's a mixture. A bit of a mystery, because it really does seem like to me there are people who do have some quality of being that is superior. And there are also people who appear to have a great deal of energy moving through them that affects other people in a very profound way that seem completely phony to me. It's a mystery. The alien guy that I showed last week, with the Nazi Star of David, I mean,
Right.
How can anybody take a guy like that seriously? And they clearly do.
Well, it's just that
And something
numbers,
comes through them that expands their hearts in a way. Now, that's an emotional experience that people get kind of addicted to. I believe that if it's not connected with an actual practice that becomes habitual within your own system, that it's a complete waste. Although who knows, it felt like, Rajneesh felt like that to me, that there were like all the prems, maybe 60-80% of the people were just in love with Bhagwan. And when they no longer could be around him, they felt really empty and had to find something else, and they never really developed a practice from it.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of people there who did have a practice, who had learned to practice, who used the energy of the commune to basically fuel their practice that came out with something really useful and solid. I think the farm was the same way.
Hey, Bill,
Uh-huh.
what happens when, like, the guru is no longer available to fuel that practice? Do you think people will fall away?
Oftentimes, it's the opposite. It's much safer to believe in somebody that can and do something crazy. Get involved in some scandal. Probably most of the people who were at the ranch with Rajneesh are no longer part of that. But there are more people involved in the religion of what he taught than there were when he was alive. And that's how religions get born. And it's interesting that then generally, a generation later, they will start telling stories that are almost the opposite of what actually happened. And turn them into some Godhead figure that they can use for authority to energize groups of practitioners. And it depends upon the practice, really, and how people understand it. I would bet that there are people who are having very significant opening experiences at the Rajneesh or the Osho ashram in Pune today, and their lives are being completely transformed. I would bet that happens with a lot of people who go there.
Same thing's probably happening at like a Jehovah's Witness compound somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think back of my Methodist upbringing, and there were preachers that we sometimes had at convocations. Like send a few people from your church to conferences that held in Boise, you know, and you would get special preachers to come. Some of those guys were amazing. I had really profound experiences and thought they were very much spiritually superior to me. I still remember the theme of one, you know, it was like, committed to what? You know, I know people are all the time talking about commitment. Are you committed? Well, what are you committed to in terms of the church, of Christianity, of the Lord's work? And I thought about that and came to a new understanding that was very useful. And thought it was not contrary to what he was preaching. You know, if you really see that you are not committed to the church, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person necessarily. Yes, you're not. You know, why pretend to?
I was going to ask you if you think you're a superior being.
I think that I am very superior to who I used to be. And that's the only thing that counts. Other people are a total mystery to me. They really seem crazy for the most part and have their own thing going on that is sometimes seems brilliant and sometimes seems very bizarre and unreliable. But me, I think I have improved significantly from 50 years ago and have learned things that are very much worth transmitting because of how much they helped me. So in terms of my own feeling about who I am, yeah, I think I'm superior to who I was.
And it's only been progress. There aren't ways in which you have failed or wish that...
I have imagined that I was doing things that I wasn't in the past. I imagined that I was at a point of expansion that was delusional in the past, absolutely. And I definitely made choices based on delusion that turned out good because I believe I have protective spirits that are helping me make use of the mistakes that I make in that way. I think it's very much a matter of degree, and that I am very much capable of making the same kind of completely mistakes based on serious misunderstanding as I ever was. I do think you are presented, people like me anyway, who have divine guidance, are constantly presented with new things that happen that enable to them to see things about themselves that they couldn't have handled because they're so disturbing, 20 years ago. And I think I don't expect to ever reach a place of satisfaction with how I am. The shock to me of going from someone who was considered superior at the farm, who answered questions
Right.
in groups and who gave themes and was one of the older, and then going to Puna where they considered me kind of an in your head,
Right.
meaning intellectual that hadn't yet opened his heart to the real teaching, and having lower than zero status as opposed to being some, and I could see their point,